And welcome everyone to the Power of the Tribe. Welcome home 2020. My next guest, I am so happy to say, for the past 10 years, she has commanded her flock at St. Peter's Church here in Del Mar, California. She is a riveting speaker and leader whose sermons are always insightful and landing. She is a global leader who serves missions around the world with her church. She leads a community that serves the homeless, sick, poor, and hungry here in our own backyard, as again, around the world. I am very, very honored to have Mother Paige Blair with us this afternoon. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted. I'm really honored. Thank you.
The honor is absolutely here. I am absolutely thrilled. So, the whole summit is about inspirational leaders, and absolutely, you are an inspirational leader. You are a woman that has devoted her life to serving others, and also you have answered your call to serve others as well as your call from God. You happen to be my mother, and I did not have a church until I reconnected with St. Peter's. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I can't wait for others to get to see and meet you. So, okay, let's open this.
Okay.
What is your secret to living life to the fullest with connection and absolutely some zest and fun?
Connection, zest, and fun. Well, that's what makes it all worth it. Connection, zest, and fun. I think my secret is trust and presence, and trusting that one of the things I'm working on, this is a growing edge for me, and it has been forever. I'm sure I'm not alone when I say this, trusting that I'm enough. We're all enough. God made all of us enough.
And so talking about being enough.
Being enough, trusting that we are enough allows us to use our energy for those things that bring us joy and not waste energy trying to control things that are beyond our control. That leaves me room for, one of the things people say about me a lot on the way out the door on a Sunday morning is they love my enthusiasm. So that was where I think the zest comes in. I think when we're present, when we're awake and aware in the moment, when we're free from those things which bind us, those things that are trying to control what's beyond our control, then there's freedom for zest and connection. Because when our energy is going to the things that don't give us life, that don't bring us joy, we have our hands really clenched tight, trying to hold on to what we can't hold on to, and they can't be open to take the hands of others. They can't be open to receive others. And so I think in many ways, much of it comes down to that space of acceptance, that space of trust, and which allows us to be joyful and be in the moment.
I love that. I love that a lot. And the whole connectivity and us being better together,
yes,
is absolutely one of the principles behind the Power of the Tribe.
Wonderful.
So as an inspirational leader, who's been your mentors?
I've had some wonderful mentors. Starting really when I was 14, my parents were going through a divorce, and the chaplain that was assigned to my father's squadron in the Air Force was named Janet Wingard. And she was the first woman clergy person I'd ever met. And she was an American Baptist and quite wonderful. And she inspired me just by being who she was, that she could have the role that she did. But she also challenged me. I remember when my boyfriend, who was significantly older than me, gave me his class ring to wear. And she saw it on a chain around my neck, and she said, "Paige, that's very interesting. We should talk about priorities."
I love it.
Awesome. at 14. I think I was still 14 and 15 at that point. So she was an inspiration just by being who she was, but also challenging me to make sure I was being who I am. When I went into college, I was inspired by a number of other clergy and professors who encouraged me to really challenge myself to think about the different ways I can use the gifts God's given me. So I started out in international relations, and my advisor at Boston University in the international relations department is a wonderful man named Hal Shockley. And Dr. Shockley was a career Army veteran. He served in the Army 3 times in Vietnam, in 1963, again in 70, and again, I think in 74. So he saw the span of our involvement there. And whenever he taught the lesson on the Vietnam experience, he would have the classroom, which was already huge because it was the 100 level intro to international relations class. So it was already packed with everyone who had to take it as a requirement. All of his old students would come back because they wanted to hear from him. And when he left the Army, he went on and got his PhD. He'd worked with NATO and done all kinds of crazy and wonderful things. And he came back to teach. He could have done anything. He could have been in government. He could have been in politics. He came back to teach. He came back to share his experience and his knowledge and his wisdom with the next generation. And he is still doing so in his retirement. He's now got to be well into his 80s. He's living here in California now and in Sherman Oaks. And he teaches at a community college just to make sure he's still giving back. And so I so admire him. He also was one of those people who inspired me with compassion. So he called me at my grandmother's house the week before I left to go to Boston University back in 1988, just to check in and introduce himself. And when I came to the school, he wanted to meet me, and so that I would know that there was someone who knew me on campus. Boston University is huge, and it's a very urban campus, and he didn't want this kid from Colorado to get lost. And he continued to be a mentor through seminary. I stayed at BU for seminary. And he continued to be a mentor even to today. He and I try to get together usually once a year, meet in the middle somewhere between our 2 homes. And recently, when the college admissions scandal broke, and the news was just rife with these stories of wealthy parents who were buying their children's way into universities, he took the time to write me a letter and to say how proud he was of me and a number of his other students who had gotten through school through our own hard work and effort, and how this horrible scandal was just making him more proud of us. Now, I've been out of college since 1992. He has not been my advisor since 1992, but he still sees a responsibility to those of us who were his mentees. And so that inspires me. Again, that's connection, right? That's relationship. That's what this is all about. And that's leadership. If it's effective, we're in relationship with the people who we're called to lead. And those relationships endure. And then a number of clergy in the church who've been inspirational to me because they've taken risks or they've challenged themselves. They've gone up against speaking truth to power, even in the structures of the church. And they've been there when I've had to do that. They've supported me when that was my role, to be the one who, shouts fire because things are on fire, and makes the church pay attention. So I've really been blessed by, chaplains and bishops and senior colleagues who've taken the time along the way to inspire me, but also to be support when I was stepping into that space of leadership, and to continue to encourage me. So I've been really, really grateful always for them.
And also, it seems to me, though, that you absolutely left your mark. Someone that when you graduated in '92. So they saw something very much that with your space and your leadership and what was to come and is still to come. Just my observation.
Well, thank you.
So when did you first receive your calling from God? And what did that look like?
I think I first received my calling when I was baptized when I was 9 years old. But at that time in my life, I had nothing to help me make sense of it. It was a very overwhelming experience. And I started crying right in the middle of my baptism because I think I couldn't make sense of it. I could not make sense of what I was feeling. It wasn't really until halfway through college that I finally got real about it and really understood what was happening. I struggled with really surrendering to God, which is what this vocation takes. I think actually the human experience is a journey of surrender. It doesn't matter what our profession is or what our vocation is. Ultimately, I think all of us are on a journey of learning how to step up and do what we're called to do, but also to, at the same time, and almost paradoxically, let go. So my experience emerging partly out of my family of origin, which was not good at letting go. My parents divorced. There were a lot of reasons why I was rather angry at God and really did not want to surrender to God, who had not saved my family. I was the only child, and I resented the heck out of having to be the only child in the midst of a divorce, having to navigate all of that by myself. And I didn't really forgive God until I was about halfway through college. And all of that resentment and wanting to seize back control from God manifested in anorexia, actually. I became anorexic. My first 2 years of college were really emotionally and physically difficult because of that. And halfway through, it was the summer of my sophomore year, I had a real epiphany in which I experienced God really breaking through and saying to me, I have work for you to do, but you can't do it if you're starving yourself to death. So you need to knock it off. And I said, can you edit this? Can you bleep me out if need be? I basically said, that's fine, but you're going to have to help because I fucked this up trying to do it on my own. I was 20. But that's literally what I said back to God. And I surrendered. And I came back to college and started putting myself back together again physically. I found my way to the Episcopal chaplaincy at BU, which was a very small community. I let myself be fed by God and other human beings in the sacrament of the Eucharist, which was very transformative. And I realized in the midst of that, what I was called to do was to be a priest. And that was a very significant departure from the foreign service officer or ambassador that I thought I was going to be studying international relations. And then it's been a very slow, ongoing surrender. I took some classes in the School of Theology at BU my senior year and fell in love with those professors, particularly the Hebrew Bible and New Testament professors. But I told myself, I am going to go and get a PhD or a THD, and I'm going to be a seminary professor, and I'm not going to be a parish priest. I'll help out in a parish or maybe a college chaplaincy, but that parish ministry is just not for me. I'm an academic. Right. Yeah, you're laughing. That's a good thing to do. So I actually did start a Doctorate of Theology program at the Harvard Divinity School in Hebrew Scripture. And within a semester realized God was not going to let me get away with that I was going to need to stop hiding in academia. And so I was working in the chaplaincy at BU at the time as part of a chaplaincy team, which was wonderful. But I told myself, okay, I'll go into parish ministry, but I'm only going to be an assistant or an associate. I'm never going to be a rector. That is just not my thing. So I withdrew from Harvard, got a job in a large parish on the North Shore in Beverly Farms, Massachusetts, and was there for 3.5 years thinking I'll just be an associate because this works for me. There's someone else with whom the buck can stop. And found out that God, even as an associate, God wouldn't let me off that hook We went through an interim transition. I ended up having to report the interim rector for sexual harassment. So much for the buck stopping anywhere but with me. I had to go up against the bishop and other church authorities to do that. They tried to get me just to sort of quiet down and keep going because I was this 28-year-old girl who was newly ordained. I had to keep fighting. But I also realized I could not be an associate anymore. Amongst other things, my trust had been broken. I wasn't really willing to trust anybody else to be my boss after that experience. And I had to work on that. But I also, after a very difficult day, realizing I couldn't stay at this church anymore, I actually got them through to their new priest coming and got the jerk out of there. But the new priest, unfortunately, wasn't really willing to step up to that interim and keep him away from the parish. So I just said, I'm really done. I don't know what this is going to mean. I left the office that day and came home and found in my mailbox a profile for the job of rector at York Harbor, Maine, which is where I then spent the next 9 years as rector. So much for never being a rector. But in that context, had to admit my limitations. I mean, in academia, even as an associate, I was comfortable enough. I didn't need to surrender that much more, which God needed me to surrender to keep me growing. But as a rector, the job was so overwhelming. I was the only priest on staff, and we had a half-time, maybe not even a half-time secretary and a quarter-time musician. I had to surrender because I couldn't do everything. I just couldn't. And I had to trust God's grace would get the rest of it done. And that only could have happened to me and within me in that context as the rector, the senior pastor of this church. And I've been rector here at St. Peter's in Del Mar for now 10 years, 10 and a half years. It'll be 11 in May. And God continues to grow me, continues to sort of throw me in the deep end and help me swim. But it's like this vocation, it's sort of the one striking moment back in 1990, rolls on and continues because I'm still having to let go. I'm still having to let God be God and me simply be Paige, and do the things I can do and let go of the things I can't control. And the lessons keep coming. That's probably maybe more than you were anticipating, but that is really how the story's gone.
I love that. And one of the biggest lessons, and often a continual lesson, is letting go of control. For some of us, it's extremely hard. And when you do, then possibilities open up. And also your courage to stand as a leader.
So leading
when you're not
and letting go. Right? There's a tension in leading and letting go, isn't there? And I think inspirational leadership by necessity has to find the balance of leading, not by controlling, but by making space for others to grow into their own leadership. And that requires radical trust, letting go, and making space for grace to find its way in.
And then it all goes back to the whole issue that you started out with, was trust, to trust the process, and to absolutely.
Right.
I love that we got to hear a little bit of your story, and again, your strength, that as a woman, that you said, okay, I guess I have to stand.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. So, all right, so then, when we're looking outward, how has your leadership changed the world?
Wow. In different ways at different times. It's been interesting. Going back to that incident in Massachusetts, I really love one of my heroes, Brother Curtis Almquist, likes to say that God is the great recycler. God wastes nothing. And so that experience of reporting my superior for sexual harassment and finding that process to be absolutely devastatingly horrible, I've found myself in leadership since calling the church to do better by survivors of sexual misconduct and sexual harassment in the church. Not where I wanted to find myself, not where I wanted to do this work, but okay, if this is where God's called me to lead, so be it. I've also, in a more global perspective, some of my joy and whimsy and zest has helped the church change the world. This is a funny and wonderful phenomenon out of my ministry in Maine called the U2 Eucharist, sometimes called the U2charist, rather tongue-in-cheek. But it was a movement around the Millennium Development Goals of the United Nations to eradicate extreme poverty. And the band U2 at the time was very involved in this movement as well. And those who are familiar with their history know that they've always actually been a Christian band. They just sort of refused to sign with a Christian label because they didn't want to be pigeonholed as a Christian rock band. And so we use their music, which is very theologically sound and biblically inspired, in the context of a regular service of worship. And we worked it out with Universal Music at the time was managing all of their copyright, that none of the money we raised would stay in our church. It would go to fight extreme poverty. And what ended up happening, because of a very well-placed press release, is the story that we were doing this got picked up, and it got picked up by the Associated Press. And they did an article on St. Patrick's Day, or soon after St. Patrick's Day, and because we did a St. Patrick's Day U2 Eucharist in Providence, Rhode Island. My team ended up taking this service on the road, so to speak. And the AP article ended up being published in media all around the world. I started getting phone calls from the BBC Ireland. It was wild. And my little team, my U2charist team at this little tiny church, tiny relatively speaking, big for Maine, tiny for everywhere else, ended up being in the middle of this great movement to raise awareness around extreme poverty, raise awareness about the fact that extreme poverty does not have to be, that there are things we can do to eradicate extreme poverty, and really inspiring the church to take a role, to live out the call in Matthew 25, when Jesus says that those who have given a cup of water to someone thirsty, or fed someone who was hungry, or visited someone in prison, did so to him. And those who do so to the least actually do so to Jesus himself. And those who don't, who ignore the hungry, who ignore the poor, who ignore the oppressed, are ignoring Christ. As we tried to live into that space, but also invite others to in a really fun way, because who doesn't love U2? Everyone loves U2. And so that was one way, goodness gracious, now 14 years ago, started in 2005, that my bestie leadership, joyful leadership, through connection, and thanks for press releases and the internet and all of that, we together really did change the world. My life at St. Peter's, it's a much bigger church. I have not had the bandwidth to do such crazy things as oversee the movement of the Eucharist. But our parish does so much locally and internationally for those in need, that my keeping that boat afloat and steered in the right direction with God's help really has continued to allow others, particularly, to change the world, whether it's our ministry to the homeless right on our campus in Del Mar, or our participation in a wonderful ministry in Namibia called Joy to the World. It started out as a kindergarten. When it started out, these children did their math figures in the sand because they didn't have chalkboards or tablets or anything. And it's since become an English preparatory primary school. And every year they're adding a new grade. So it started out as a kindergarten. And now I believe it's going to 6th grade soon, which is amazing. These children are learning in English, which is great. Their parents are excited. And it's now hundreds of students, about half of whom are residential students too. So our parishioners are very involved in that, not just raising money here, but actually going to Africa, going to Namibia, and helping out, doing service projects around the campus of the school, and getting to know the children. So in ways close to home, but also abroad, our people are doing wonderful things in God's name. And it's a privilege to be their rector. It's a privilege to be their leader, and they inspire me. I don't know if I'm an inspirational leader in that situation, but I'm certainly an inspired leader by their devotion and their hard work and commitment.
We're glad to have you too, by the way. Okay, so 2020,
Yes.
new year, new decade. What's in store?
Actually simplifying a little bit. Simplifying. We are going to go spend some time doing a bit of back to the basics at St. Peter's, looking at our spiritual well-being, looking at our connection to God and to one another, and ensuring that that connection is strong, and doing a little assessment, both within ourselves individually, but also as a whole, as a community, asking ourselves, okay, this activity, this thing we're doing, is it actually serving our mission? We like it, it feels good, it's fun, it's doing some good, but is it the kind of good we're supposed to be doing? Is it really mission-driven work that we're doing here? And I'm excited by that, because I think in some ways we'll be simplifying, so we'll be able to be really diving deeper into what we're doing, and that is exciting. But it also, it's another act of surrender. We're going to have to let go. We're going to have to trust. And there are a few things more exciting than trusting in the Spirit while in community. Holding hands with other people as we jump. So we're not jumping alone. As a community, and trusting God together is pretty thrilling. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you for coming on. Merry Christmas.
To you as well.
I look forward to seeing you really soon. And just, yes, thank you for being our inspired leader.
It's an honor. I'm glad you think the label fits. I'm feeling a little bit bashful about it, but thank you so much. And I wish you and all of your community a wonderful, wonderful holy season and glorious 2020.
See you soon. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.